Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Chevelle Cody here, my friend Ken. We met here at iBullock. I'm at Fort Benning, as you all know that. And just want to introduce his car, which is a '69 Cougar, which I first seen when we were in processing. I went into the parking lot and I was like, oh, that's a sick car. And of course I'm gonna park my Chevelle next to it. So I park my Chevelle next to it. I go and get in line, and just to strike up a conversation, because nobody knows who anybody is at this point, I'm like, hey, did you guys see that cool car out there? And then he was like, oh, my car. Like, immediately knew what I was talking about. I was like, yeah, the Cougar. He's like, yeah, that's mine. And from then on, we've been hanging out and just talking about car stuff. And fun fact too, he's actually a subscriber. I didn't even know that. The first thing I was like, yeah, I mentioned I have a YouTube channel. And he's like, oh, I follow you. And I was like, that is super cool. So without further ado, this is Ken, his car. And yeah, he's just gonna talk to you about, just the history and stuff, and the specs. And he's also, I forgot to mention, this is his daily driver. Like, he doesn't have any other car. This is his only car. And that is super cool, because we're all about that on this channel, is daily driving our old muscle cars.
Hi everyone, name's Ken. This is my car. It's a 1969 Mercury Cougar XR7, originally 351 automatic car. Now it's a pretty heated up 351 with 4-speed. Just talking about the car, the black hood is actually from my very first car, which was also a 1969 XR7 Cougar that unfortunately I crashed. Totally my fault, just young, stupid high school with bald rear tires. But that was my first car, and it really means a lot to me to bring along the hood and actually the engine too, but I'll explain more of that later. This car, I bought it my junior year of college, picked it up from a guy actually only about an hour north of Georgia, so the car kind of came home, oddly enough, when I came down to Fort Benning. Since then, I've done almost every job you can do on the car because the previous owner really didn't know what he was doing and either messed up or incorrectly installed a bunch of things that just left a lot of work for me. Too many things to go into, but he really messed up the brakes and he really messed up the engine by running the wrong oil in it, and he wiped the camshaft. So I needed to put, before I could even get the car on the road, it needed a new camshaft, which is a bunch of fun.
So Ken, you just finished up talking about like the history and kind of where you've came from with this car. So what did you do next to get it to where it's at today?
So like I was saying, I had to replace the camshaft. Which was the first thing I did after I bought the car, because the cylinder number 5 had no functioning valves anymore. The lobe was just worn smooth. So new camshaft right away. Did all the basic stuff, so you make sure the brakes work, replace the rubber brake lines. Looked at the suspension, noticed it was really tired. All the rubber looked like original 50-year-old components, so that definitely got put on the list of stuff to do. But after that, there was, I had to redo an axle seal, nothing crazy, just change all the fluids. But pretty soon after getting it going, I went through a few months of fix something, drive it for a week or two, break, fix that again. A big recurring problem that I had was my water pump gasket kept failing. Eventually traced that down to a bent fan clutch. So after I fixed the water pump issue, the next big thing that I started to deal with was electrical. Just a lot of stuff, connections not really where they needed to be, chased around some ignition stuff, and a lot of that was just diving into the wiring and realizing that, again, the previous owner just had rewired the car in the worst way possible. So there was a lot of redoing connections, getting more solid grounds going on, and just dealing with fixing someone else's problems. After that, though, is really when the upgrades, though, started to happen. So at that point, I had put some money aside for suspension and settled on the Mike Meyer coilover setup in the front, and then his, what he calls his Mod 1 setup for the rear. So that basically looks like coilovers in the front with JRI shocks, which are pretty much the best shocks you can buy for the money. Or excuse me, pretty much the best shocks you can buy. All those guys running autocross in like the Good Guys autocross events, they're running JRIs. They're incredible shocks, and it really was a big difference for me there. Tubular arms on top and bottom, which was great because it changed up the camber curve and just the way the suspension, the alignment specs that I'm able to run with the car. So that was incredible. Got rid of all the rubber there, which means much more direct and it's not shifting around, because the Fords have a problem with their strut rods where it's a big, thick, like 2-inch rubber bushing in the front. And when you brake or accelerate hard, those bushings compress and your alignment goes wild. So you can actually like change lanes while braking accidentally. Yeah, it's not a great thing. And it's actually why a lot of people, when they first get these cars and they have all the old rubber, they get kind of freaked out by them, because they can just start changing their all of their alignment specs without doing anything, because there's like 2 inches on each side of rubber. So that's terrifying.
I've ever seen like a video, it was like somebody that was I don't know, it was like a Mustang, which is pretty much the same car as this, right? And
yeah.
I think they replaced the floor pans, but they didn't weld the subframe to it. And in the video they were talking about, I think it was Uncle Tony's Garage, I think, you know. Yeah. That's awesome channel, but they were showing it like, it was just all over the place, you know, wasn't even anything. So it's crazy. It's little stuff like that, so.
Yeah, doing the new suspension, I was fighting a lot with the unibody construction of the cars, which is exactly what you're talking about. Like, everything's a stressed member. So there's a pretty nice brace, which you'll see in some of the videos up front, a triangulated export brace, they call it, which really tied up the front of the car. And then the rear suspension, honestly, my favorite part of the suspension of this car is the rear panhard bar, which is also a Mike Meyer piece that ties the subframe back there together and then locates the rear axle. Panhard bars, I do a bunch of research on them. If you have a car with rear leaf springs, I highly recommend you run them, because it really does just tighten up the back of the car in an incredible way and lets the leaf springs do what they're really supposed to do. After that, I just drove the car for a while, didn't really have many problems until after a big long road trip, which I think we're going to talk about later. I pretty much wore out the engine. The car's a 69, the engine was from a 70. I didn't put it in there, but it had pretty much hadn't been replaced since it was brand new. So, you know, kind of on the last legs of the engine. So I actually took the block from my original Cougar, that first one that I had. Just the block and the crankshaft. Every other piece is brand new. Brought it to a really good shop up where I live in New York. And at this point, it's been just fine-tooth comb, blueprinted. Everything, rods balanced on themselves, lightest rod paired with the heaviest piston, all that stuff. The engine is insanely smooth now and makes about 470 horsepower. So stock crank, stock size rods and pistons, but now I'm doing 10.1 to 1 compression, running J&E forged pistons and good Eagle rods, AFR 185 heads, a cam with 228 intake exhaust duration at 50, 512 lift at 50, and then about a 112 LSA, Edelbrock RPM air gap intake, and a Holley 770 Avenger vacuum secondary carb, just for some good drivability on the car. And it's a perfectly drivable engine. I love it. The transmission is rebuilt Ford top loader that I had modified to have big block input-output shafts. So it's probably good for about 600 foot-pounds of torque. And then it's just a stock 9-inch in the rear with 3.0's open diff. That's gonna change soon, but I need to get a drive shaft made. So you've heard a bunch of the work I've done on the car. There are some things that I've done specifically to make it a better daily driver. The first thing on that is you hear a lot of things about old cars always overheating. That's due to a lot of stuff. Sometimes the engines haven't been rebuilt, so the passages inside are all corroded shut, so you got a lot less flow. Sometimes your radiators are just gummed up and they don't get a bunch of flow. The water pump, can be a lot of stuff like that. Also, whenever you rebuild an engine and bore it 30 over, now you have less mass, so they do run a little hotter after that. But I pretty much decided to just preempt that, and I went with a nice Griffin aluminum radiator with a dual electric fans, which just trigger off of a temperature sensor that screws into the radiator. So that's been a huge improvement, never even come close to overheat. It's really satisfying to see the temp gauge go up to about 190 and then go back down to 180 in like a minute. So definitely would recommend if you're trying to go with a new radiator. Griffin radiators make some great stuff. Next thing I did was a Vintage Air Front Runner kit on the new engine. So that's a full serpentine setup. I have about 180 amp alternator, brand new water pump, brand new Sundown air conditioning compressor, because the car has a Vintage Air setup in it, which is really nice. It's actually disconnected right now, just because putting the whole new system in, I was running an older, more stock style setup, and I haven't had a chance to reconnect it yet. So I've been troubleshooting some engine stuff. But that Vintage Air kit running a full modern serpentine setup is huge. One belt, no using a pry bar to tighten up V-belts. I had a lot of pretty bad personal experiences with V-belts causing issues and snapping and hurting other things and slicing radiator hoses and things. So do you need that? Absolutely not. But for me, it was something that made me a lot more confident in the car, and you do get a bit more horsepower out of it just because it's a bit less parasitic drag with that. The last big kind of daily driver thing that I did with the car was it's fully dynamatted on the inside. And now I definitely need more because I'm running a 3-inch exhaust with long tube headers and an X pipe and some pretty aggressive MagnaFlow mufflers. It just dumps right before the axle. That's because of the panhard bar. It can be hard to snake stuff through. I'm not a huge fan. It's honestly too loud for me right now, but the Dynamat certainly helps with that. And even though it's expensive, it was a really good investment there. Brakes are stock. I'm just running better pads. That's really the next thing on the list because I don't really like running around with 470 horsepower and stock brakes, but there's only so much money to go around. And that's pretty much all about the car in that sense. Everything that I haven't talked about is stock in that, but there really isn't too much stock left other than the sheet metal and most of the interior.
The next thing I really wanted Ken here to talk about is this guy literally drove this car the entire way around the United States. And I think that's super cool and something that I want you to talk about.
Yeah, so it was something I'd wanted to do for a while. I'd actually, my freshman year of college, I started putting money away in an investment account specifically to pay for a road trip at the end of senior year. after I graduated, and even though COVID started happening, I realized that I would be able to do it, but just try to do it safely, focus a lot more on national parks and stuff. So it ended up being 11,000 miles over 33 days, which is a lot. It's a lot of driving. It's partially what killed that old engine. Did it on the very last legs of that. It really started acting up about 2 months later and sucking down quarts of oil between fill-ups. But started off, went to Badlands National Park, Yellowstone, Redwood National Park, Death Valley, right through Texas, Smoky Mountain National Park, came up to Pennsylvania, and then hooked up with a family vacation at the end of it. And it was incredible. Driving off-road in national parks with this car was great, even though there were a few breakdowns along the way. Had one of my V-belt incidents where the air conditioning belt came off, damaged the alternator pump, which eventually came off and sliced through the radiator, the upper radiator hose, which was my first and only tow truck of the trip. I also lost all of my brakes while doing 85 on the highway in the left lane. That was bad. Ended up plugging the whole rear brakes out, rebleeding the front, and running the rest of the trip on that. Which maybe wasn't the most responsible thing to do, but it was kind of my only option at that point. And just had a great time. I did it mostly solo. The first week was with one of my cousins going out to Yellowstone, but after that, it was just driving, kind of just me in the car and just seeing places that I always wanted to see and going out there alone. It was a good exploratory thing. I wouldn't say I'm a different person now that I come back. I know a lot of people like to say things like that, which is kind of a joke, but I'm definitely glad I did it. And every time I drive the car now and I get in it, I don't want to stop. It's something you wouldn't think about. You'd think at the end of a month-long journey where you've done, because I did quite a few 500-mile plus days. I think my longest day was almost 800 miles. And you'd think at the end of that trip, after a month of being on the road and really only sleeping in the same place for 2 nights in a row a few times during the trip, you'd really think you'd get tired of it, especially in a loud, smelly old car. I changed the spark plugs on the side of the road because one of them had gummed up so bad because I was eating so much oil that it was about 90 degrees, 50% humidity, and just leaning over the 180 plus degree engine in the sunlight was, I sweat out probably 3 pounds that day just there, and you'd think I'd get tired of it at the end of it. But every time I get in the car now, I just want to keep going, which is fun. And it's part of the many reasons why I still love the car.
I think that's super cool because that's actually something I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to go to California or something. At least when I was younger. It's starting to get a little wild over there, but I want to like take a big, just cool road trip on Route 66 or something in my car. And I honestly love what you've done with the car, man. Like, it's super cool. Like, you made it comfortable, the Dynamat, the air conditioning, all that stuff I don't have and I want. And seeing how yours is turning out, it's like super cool. It's something I really want to do. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions or any concerns, just let me know down in the comments. Any questions for Ken, just let me know. I'll message him. I'll also link his blog in the description, so you can check out that and all the places he went through and just all the stuff he wrote about. Had fun making this video. It's an awesome car, and I'll see you guys on the next one.